morning and welcome. David Horowitz is the founder and president of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, an institution devoted to defend the principles of individual freedom, the rule of law, private property, limited government, and academic freedom. He is also the editor for Front Page Magazine and the founder of Students for Academic Freedom. Horowitz has authored numerous books, including Radical Son, Indoctrination U, and The Professors, the 101 Most Dangerous Academics. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in English from Columbia University and a master's degree in English literature at the University of California, Berkeley. Today, he will be speaking on rules for radicals, what constitutional conservatives should know about Saul Alinsky. Please join me in welcoming David Horowitz.
Good morning. I've been asked not to speak too long, so I brought along small notes. What constitutional conservatives should know about Saul Alinsky and radicals. A conservative outlook, the linking of constitutional and conservative is also a clue, is rooted in the past. Conservatives are concerned with who we have been, and therefore who we are, and therefore what it takes to govern us well and to create a reasonably productive and reasonably harmonious. Harmonious almost sounds like a left-wing word right there. A little delusional. Societies, and therefore conservatives are concerned about principles, and inherent in principles are limits. Limits, the way you have to limit human behavior and the way you have to limit the human beings that limit us, the government. That's why it's about limited government. For conservatives, the root cause of social problems is us. That's the basic orientation of a conservative outlook. Radicals have a completely different orientation. They are oriented towards the future. And of course, there is no the future. They're oriented towards an imaginary future, a future in which they can put everything into place as they see fit, and which is a form of, or would be a form of human perfection if it were realized. Radicals speak of social justice as if there could ever be such a thing. If human beings are the source of our problems, they're not going to solve them, are they? Because the radical, and I don't think, if you have been a conservative all your life, you can probably not, would be a huge effort, and I've found few conservatives who want to take the time out to do it, to put themselves in the leftist mindset, a radical mindset, and see the way they see the world. I'm often asked by conservatives, how can they hate America? It's such a great place. How could they not see that in the Middle East, Israel is a democracy, it's tolerant, it has 1 million Muslim Arabs living there with more rights than in all of the Muslim, in any Muslim country. And on the other side, you have religious fanatics who want to purge the world of infidels. How is it difficult to know which side to be on? And the answer is that, of course, radicals don't see the reality in the practical, boots on the ground reality, either in Israel or the United States. They're not looking at the wonderful privileges that we have as Americans, thanks to the founders and the constitutional framework they created. What they're looking at is America versus heaven. Well, we lose. We lose. So the radical, Marx actually, in the 18th Brumaire, quotes Goethe's Mephistopheles saying, "Everything that exists deserves to perish." That is the mentality of the radical. Everything should be swept away so that we can create a world where there's no inequality. How do you do that? I mean, no inequality, no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, no poverty, no war. That's the radicals' fantasy. And that's how they judge the present and judge everything negatively. For the radical oriented towards the future, there are no limits. Human potential is good, and it's locked in by all the oppressive structures, or as they see them, oppressive structures of the social order. They have contempt for structure and process. You might ask yourself how somebody like Barack Obama, who has been the beneficiary of all of America's greatness and goodness, came from difficult family beginnings, to Harvard, became president of the United States, how he could have spent his adult years as a lawyer for Acorn, which is an organization convicted of greatest election frauds in the history of the United States. Well, it's because if you're a radical, you think elections are a fraud to begin with. So by committing fraud, you're just correcting a fraud. Who was Saul Alinsky? Saul Alinsky was a Chicago radical who came to adulthood in the 30s. He was a sociology graduate student at the University of Chicago and did studies of the Al Capone mob and adopted as his teacher Frank Nitti. Frank Nitti was a guy that Kevin Costner threw off the top of the building. He was the enforcer. I've said Frank Nitti was my teacher. What Saul Alinsky's contribution to the radical assault on our culture and our society was this. He was a fellow traveler, that is, of the communists. That is, he did not. Fellow travelers were leftists who endorsed the goal, the fantasy future, and if you believe in the fantasy of a socialist future, then you condemn America and capitalist societies as a species of hell. He shared that view. But fellow travelers didn't go along with the means. He thought the communists were too dogmatic and too rigid. He was what you call an anti-communist, which means he was an anti-American, anti-Western democracy, anti-Judeo-Christian, and so forth. He was also very critical of the New Left. I was part of the New Left. And of all the bad things that you know about the New Left, the left of the 60s, and I've written with Peter Collier a book called Destructive Generation, which is my view of that left. It had one redeeming grace. We said what we were about. You know, we want revolution and we want it now. You know, we want America to lose in Vietnam. We said these things. And Alinsky thought we were nuts for saying that. And we had slogans, up against the wall, the sky's the limit, off the pigs. Of all the bad things I did in the 60s, I never said off the pigs, but that was the attitude towards the police. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. And Alinsky said, what you're doing when you say those things is you're telegraphing to people what you're going to do, what you want to do, and they're going to understand that you're a threat, and that's bad. So what Alinsky said, and Alinsky gives an example from one of his heroes, which is Lenin, where Lenin said that we want the ballot, but when we win the elections, then we'll have the guns, and it'll be a different story. Alinsky said, you don't say political power grows out of the barrel of the gun when the other side has the guns. I actually had a confrontation like that in the 60s with Michael Lerner, the editor of T-Cunt, when he came to me in semi-hysterical mode saying, you have to buy a gun, David. I said to him, Michael, if you could tell me one situation where it's the police or the military against us and we win, I'll consider it. He said, well, then you have to buy a handgun for assassinations. Michael Lerner is an unreconstructed leftist and posing as a rabbi these days. So Alinsky's, really the main thrust of the Alinsky doctrine is deception, lie. You don't tell people what your agendas are. When you have to win them, when you're winning them over, you tell them, well, government-controlled healthcare would be bad, but completely private would be bad. So, we have to do the reasonable thing, and we'll bring Republicans and Democrats together, and we're not the red states or the blue states, we're the United States. All the things that Barack Obama said. You snooker people. Barack Obama is not only an Alinsky disciple, but an Alinsky trainee. When he came out of Columbia, his first job was with an Alinsky organization. He went through the Alinsky training. He was the lawyer for another Alinsky organization, Acorn. That's who he is. When he says community organizer, I'm a community organizer, he means I am a follower of Saul Alinsky, because that's what Alinsky was. It was community organizing is organizing an army And that's Alinsky's term, not mine. I put it all these things in this little booklet. It's organizing a power base. The idea is to create the power to do what you want, with no clear idea of what you want. I will get into what they want, but there really is. There's never been. There were socialist plans. A Frenchman named Fourier had a plan. There were these utopian communities in the 19th century, and they all failed. Marx was smarter. He said you can't have a blueprint. And since Marx, there are no serious radicals have attempted to devise a plan. So their plan really is that everything exists deserves to perish. Their plan, if you get to make a revolution, there are two sides of it. One is taking down the old system, and the other is creating the new. No attention is given to creating the new, so it's really a form of nihilism. That's what radicalism is about. That's what Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. The original title was Rules for Revolution, which is why I used it in the booklet. I did. Revolutionaries only understand destruction. They understand destruction and deception, which is one of the means of destruction. Alinsky's idea then was you pose as, we called it in the 60s, boring from within. You pose as a liberal. I was appalled when in the early 70s, it was really during the McGovern campaign, all my communist friends, all the people who, like Tom Hayden, who advocated liberated zones in America. He wanted guerrilla warfare in American streets, suddenly appeared as Democrats and liberals in 1971, 1972, because we hated liberals. And that was another good thing about the New Left. That's what kept it smaller and prevented it from ever getting to the White House, because we despised liberals. Because we felt that liberals were would co-opt you into the system. But Alinsky got very close to Bobby Kennedy, became part of the War on Poverty program, and financed his radical operations from taxpayer funds. I was, people used to ask me when I ceased to be a leftist, who funded you? Moscow, Havana? Well, I'm sure there was money from Moscow and Havana, but that's not who funded us. Who funds the left is you, through taxpayer dollars. People were outraged when Acorn was exposed, because they got $53 million. Remember that? $53 million in federal funds starting in 1994. That ring a bell? 1994. That's when Republicans took over the House and the purse strings. Republicans funded Acorn, made it the largest radical organization in the history of the country. And that's mainly because conservatives, I don't know how to put this politely, but are just not paying attention. And I changed the mission statement of my center. It sounded like what all conservative organizations sound like. They're very positive and good. The principles of constitutional principles, private property, rule of law, that's all well and good. But we're in a war, as I will get to in a moment. So my center is now called, its mission is the defense of free societies, whose cultural and economic foundations are being attacked by an international left. That's the reality we're in. And I would like conservatives to move 10% off the positive approach to a certain negative one. There's a threat here, and it's an internal threat that has to be met. A prototypical Alinskyite is the former Green Job czar, who is now part of the brains trust of the Democratic Party, Van Jones. He's with the Center for American Progress here in Washington, which is John Podesta's operation, and is the brains trust of the Democratic Party. Van Jones was a vocal, self-described communist, and this was not in the 1930s, but but in the 1990s and into 2000. He belonged to a Maoist revolutionary vanguard party that is modeled on the Bolsheviks, called Storm, and were Maoists. And then he had a conversion experience to Alinskyism. And what he said, how he described it was, I prefer, I've given up the cheap satisfactions of the radical pose for the deep satisfactions of radical ends. So if you, well, he's such a smooth talker now that Meg Whitman, the Republican candidate for governor in California, sang his praises, thought that he was just a wonderful person, and that's because she had no idea who he was. One of the, I think probably the best thing that I've done in the quarter of a century that I've devoted to atonement for my youthful sins is creating an encyclopedia of the left on the web, which explains exactly what people like Van Jones are about. You must always remember that the slogan of the Communist Party in my youth, which was when Joseph Stalin was alive, was peace, jobs, and democracy. How many people have seen The Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Well, that film was made, the original film was made during the 50s and was about the communists, but it could be about anybody, not anybody, but it could be about a lot of people that call themselves liberal today. They're pod people, basically. The New Left, it actually was an issue of SDS's New Left Notes. There was an article by an SDS radical in the 60s, which said the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And what that means is and this is a core principle of Alinskyism, that the way you view issues is always instrumental. Does it further the revolution? You may have noticed that even though there are something like 600 women's studies programs, which are basically political parties in the university organizing for feminism, there are no protests over the unbelievable abuse and oppression of women in the Muslim world. None. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a courageous warrior against Islamic oppression of women. I asked her, I saw her last month in Philadelphia. I asked her if she's ever been invited to a women's studies department to talk about the oppression of women in Islam. And she said once, but it turned out that it was a an American Enterprise Institute benefactor who was either a trustee at UC San Diego or whatever he was, and got her one talk in all these years. And that's because the issue is never the issue. Feminists are not about women. They're part of the left. They're about destroying American capitalism, or imperialism as they would prefer to call it. And they see the Muslim world and the jihad against us, however much they may deplore this or that tactic, as a movement for liberation from American oppression. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And therefore, you should understand that green jobs is not about the environment. What green jobs is about, it was having a communist, Van Jones, recruit an army of leftists at taxpayer expense. And believe me, it's still about that. And the healthcare system, it's not about delivering quality healthcare, the Obamacare. It's about control of everybody's life and also putting people on the payroll. Alinsky, actually, there was one of the articles I used as a resource was a New Republic article by Ryan Leitza, who interviewed Alinsky trainers and people who had been trained by Alinsky himself. And they described to him how idealistic people, because the seduction of the left is these, wonderful social justice, peace, harmony, peace, jobs, and democracy. Just, so you get a lot of people in who are salivating to that bell, or those bells. And Alinsky used to say, why are you a community organizer? Why do you want to be a community organizer? And the answers would, to make the world a better place, to whatever, end racism. And he would scream at the person who said that. And said, no. You want to be a community organizer to get power. That's what it's all about, power. This is the Alinsky's Rules for Revolution is a nihilistic tract, Machiavellian and nihilistic. It's everything that one would regard as evil from any ethical standpoint. But of course, it's all redeemed by the fantasy future. And this is what the left is about. But Alinsky is a particularly frank expression of this. The Stalinists actually thought that they, the planned economy, they had vague ideas enough about the future, but it was much more structured and self-respecting than Alinskyism. What organizes the Alinsky radical is the hatred of the so-called haves. America is a have society. There are haves and have-nots. This is it's just another way of formulating the Marxist idea of a ruling class. Well, but if you think about America, I think that something like 70% of the millionaires in this country are first generation, which means they made it. It's absurd to think of this as a country of haves and have. Now, of course, there are some people who just have. They were born with it. They don't do anything for it. But there are so many more people with a lot of money who are investing it all the time, creating jobs, creating wealth for everybody. The proper way to think about the divisions of our societies is the cans and the cannots, the do's and the do-nots, the wills and the will-nots. That's what it's about. But if you think about it that way, then that's the end of radicalism. The whole mythology of radicalism is exploded. And of course, this Alinsky idea, I mean, he says that my book, Rules for Radicals, is modeled on Machiavelli's The Prince, which was how rulers should rule. The difference is that my book is about taking away the power of the haves, and his book is about how the haves can keep it. Then where does this reactionary view of the world as rigidly, or society as rigidly divided into rulers and rule come from? Well, it comes from the Communist Manifesto, which is the most read, most assigned text. I don't know this for a fact, but I know this from studying, being at 300 universities and asking questions. The most assigned text in our universities today is the Communist Manifesto. I've met innumerable students who've had to read it 3 and 4 times in different classes. And you remember what the Communist Manifesto, how it begins. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. It's slave owners versus slaves, I forget the Roman, well, whatever it is. Lords versus serfs. And of course, then it becomes capitalists versus wage slaves versus the proletariat. And what the Communist Manifesto basically says is that democracy, capitalist democracies, are a fraud. Just what Acorn says. That there is an actual ruling class that rigs elections, and so elections don't really mean anything. And what Marx incited in the Communist Manifesto was war, civil war. Since elections don't mean anything, then anything is justified in subverting them and establishing the rule of the pure and the just vanguard, which is the left. And Alinsky, the other aspect of Alinskyism, the deception in the first place, the don't tell people where you're going. Just lead them along. And I was thinking of that, by the way, the other day with this idiotic NASA pronouncement. Well, if you want to take America down, I mean, space technology is advanced technology. It has all kinds of implications, both peaceful and military. So you cut its funding. Obama's virtually ended the space program. And then you devote it to giving our technologies to our enemies. That's what that is about. So Alinsky is really a closet Marxist. And so a lot of his book is devoted to explaining that this is a war. The haves will not give up, the imaginary haves will not give up power peacefully. That's an axiom of the radical outlook. And therefore, you conduct a war against them. Now, the war, when you don't have the guns, you don't look to guns as the solution. You look to getting power by other means. In our society, it's getting it through the ballot box, which they have done. And then you use those means to get to the next step. You always deal, and this is an Alinsky precept. You always deal with the situation you have. If you're too radical, you will destroy yourself, which is what it's another beneficent aspect of the 60s New Left. It destroyed itself. It kept upping, we called it upping the ante. So, it was protests in the streets, march on the Pentagon, stop the draft, and then it was guerrilla warfare. And white middle-class students actually were not too thrilled about getting themselves killed in a guerrilla warfare. And so the weathermen, which is Obama, what do you call him, an amanuensis. I'm one of those who's been persuaded that Billy Ayres wrote Obama's book, but he certainly was a strategic comrade and close political intimate of Obama's through his rise. Billy Ayres went off to the wars, but they didn't take very many people with them. They had a few hundred people out of a new left that could put on demonstrations with hundreds of thousands. So you deal with the situation that you have, but you understand always that it's a war. Conservatives look at leftists and see them as misguided. People whom you can maybe explain if you had enough time to explain to them. But they're just misguided. They see us as evil. They see themselves as the army of the saints, and they see us as the party of Satan. And that's because mentally they're in a war for a new world on the other side of the rainbow. So in this war, the ends, of course, justify the means. And Alinsky addresses this problem in just those terms. He has utter contempt for the liberals of his day who said, well, I agree with your ends. That should tell you something about modern liberalism right away. I agree with your ends, destroy the system, but I don't like your means. And what Alinsky said was that it's an irrelevant question, means and ends, because it should always be about the particular means to achieve a particular end. But then he goes on and he has actual a principle of I forget what he calls it, but a tactical principle, which is that in a war, all means are justified. A war is about survival. If you have the radical outlook, you see it as heaven versus hell. And actually, Rosa Luxemburg, that was her slogan, socialism or barbarism. And if you read Christopher Hitchens' irresistible but very muddled memoir, I mean, Rosa Luxemburg is his heroes. That is, Christopher, who's wise enough to understand America is worth saving and is a chief, really, defender of freedom in the world today, nonetheless thinks that socialism or barbarism is a heroic slogan. So it's a very deeply imprinted binary in the radical mind. If you believe that around the corner is health care for all, food for all, shelter for all, and on and on. And this is the Green Party platform, by the way, literally. Then America is a horrible place, and almost anything you would do would be justified, or anything. If you believed, let's put it a different way, if you believed that you could bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth What crime would you not commit? And what lie would you not tell to do it? And that's why the great atrocities, all the really great, it's a bad word, monstrous, large atrocities of the last 100 years have been committed by radicals seeking a better world. All of them. And I will close with this, because it gets personal for anybody who's been a conservative and opened their mouths. They understand the politics of personal destruction that is coming their way. Alinsky's biographer, who is a great admirer of Alinsky's, gives an example of when George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, I can't remember if he was I think he was a UN representative. He had been the head of the CIA, and he was our ambassador, UN ambassador, and was speaking, I think it was at Texas A&M, and students wanted to protest his speech. Since he had been with the CIA, I mean, they associated him with the Vietnam War and everything. And Alinsky's advice to them was to dress up in Ku Klux Klan outfits and cheer Bush on. Well, I mean, that tells you what Alinskyism is in a nutshell. You tar and feather, stigmatize, and obliterate anybody who disagrees with you. And, if you've argued that racial preferences are actually, and you all, I can see in this audience, would put it very politely, discriminatory. I would say racist, but discriminatory is fine. You will be accused of being a racist. Because racism, in our context, is a destroyer. You are a racist. I mean, if you are a racist, you become an unperson. You're drummed out of polite society. And it was Lenin, of course. I mean, none of this is original. It was Lenin who said that the object of a political debate is not to defeat the opponent in an argument, but to wipe him from the face of the earth. And you will notice that the political figures in our political life who have been wiped from the face of the earth by having said the wrong thing at any given time are all Republicans and conservatives. If you are a leftist, you can have a prostitution ring run out of your house and wind up in control of the American economy. Constitutional conservatives have a big task in front of them. You're disposed to be reasonable, to observe principles, and the principles enjoin you to give the other fellow the benefit of the doubt, to include diverse opinions, and so forth. And you're facing an enemy that wants to destroy you personally and socially. You have to find out a way to square that circle. Thank you. The good news is that I think we've distributed 400,000 copies of this everything I said is really in this little booklet. That people are, Obama has waked people up. And that's a good, it's like the new left. That's the benign part, that conservatives are finally understanding. I spent 20 years in utter frustration saying to conservatives, stop calling them liberals. They're bigoted, they're intolerant, they're unprincipled, and they want to bring about a socialist, oppressive, Leviathan state. They're socialists. And now, this is Glenn Beck, Senator DeMint, Bill O'Reilly, whatever, conservatives finally are calling them by their right names. And actually, it was Confucius who said that if you want to restore justice or establish justice, you have to begin by calling things by their right names. Jenny?
David, we all owe you quite a bit of gratitude for being on the front lines as long as you've been on the front lines trying to warn us. So thank you for that. I want to ask you, when you survey the environment, what gives you hope? And you just alluded to some of it. To me, it's the Tea Party, the new citizen activists rising up that is surprising. And it's the internet, and it's the talk radio, and it's the collapse of the mainstream media. All of those are circumstances that are helping us right now in the fight of our life.
Yes.
What do you think?
No, I agree. I've spoken at least 4 Tea Party events. I think the Tea Parties is the most exciting development in conservatism since I've been aware of conservatives. That there's nothing more powerful than that. I think it's getting involved. I mean, how did we lose our schools? We lost our schools because conservatives did nothing. And it's still very difficult. As you may know, I've written 4 books on universities, and the 5th one will be out in the fall. And have had very, very little support. I mean, I've had good support from some conservative groups, like Young America's Foundation, a few Republicans, including some members of the Republican leadership. But the Republican Party is completely asleep on the problem of the schools, although in Texas there has been a blip there on the radar, a very exciting one in my view. Conservatives complain a lot. They're good at complaining. I mean, you know, I think of it this way. I mean, I love Bill Buckley. Bill Buckley wrote a wonderful book about Yale in 1951, I think, is when God and Men at Yale, might have been 52, was published. And his idea was that if you put up an argument, and people will, I guess, buy it or not. But he never created an academic reform movement. He was the first president of ISI, which is now itself, what does that make it, almost 60 years old. And ISI is a wonderful educational, it brings literature to students and speakers to campus. But it has never engaged in academic reform. And in fact, there is no, since I started my academic Bill of Rights campaign, there's been 2 conservative organizations that have attempted to do something. But we don't have a conservative educational reform movement, and our schools are now recruitment and indoctrination centers for the Democratic Party and the extreme radical left. So we got a lot of work to do, but I have seen more, boy, I hate this, it's such a California word, growth in the conservative movement, and just in terms of its political understanding that there's a war on. It's not just about elections. It's going on every day and every week and every month. I'm more advanced on the conservative front in that since the election of Barack Obama than in the preceding 20 or 30 years. That's my optimism. Yeah.
I'll mangle this quote, but I understand that Mr. Alinsky at one point said something about being able to talk a millionaire out of all of his money one day to support something that he would hang him for on the next day, essentially. Something
Well, actually, Lenin said you can count on the capitalists to sell you the rope that we'll hang them with.
do you think, I just wondered.
And Alinsky was very good at that. Yeah, absolutely.
He was.
And just let's not forget that Walter Annenberg, a lifelong Republican and conservative, gave $900 million to the left, including $50 million to Billy Ayers, for the purpose of bringing radical anti-American organizers into the Chicago public school system. Conservatives, wake up.
My question is, do you think...
And that's actually the good news. Because there is a conservative mass out there, and a conservative organizations, and a conservative movement. And it's a much easier sell than persuading these religious leftists to change their religion, is to wake up conservatives. If you would just wake up conservatives, we'll win. That's it. Stop worrying about, I don't know, introducing Keith Olbermann to sanity or something. Don't worry about that. It's not important. What's important is that conservatives wake up and stop attacking each other. I'm just up to here with the attacks on Glenn Beck, for example, just as an example. I mean, this guy has got a school on television. If you disagree with 10% of it, so what? I wish there were more Glenn Becks out there. Stop. I never see Republicans so bloody-minded as when they're attacking each other. Never do they attack Democrats the way they attack each other. And it just, anyway.
My question is, do you think the Soroses and the Lewises and the Sandlers and those people know about that kind of mindset? Or
okay, he's talking about billionaires that fund the communist left. Now here's I give my little Hollywood story. I actually gave up on which will illuminate that or answer the question. I gave up watching the Academy Awards when Gandhi, a boring and falsifying film, Gandhi was not, well, anyway, I won't go into that. Deceptive propaganda film, good fiction. No, bad fiction, it was boring. When that won the Academy Award over E.T., I said, that I'm not watching anymore. And why did Gandhi win over E.T.? Because Gandhi was everything that Hollywood wants to be: thin, moral, and tan. And that's what it gets them. It gets them being, feeling good about themselves. Soros is a criminal, but he's announced that he aspires to be the conscience of the world. So you will notice when the Kennedy family was a right-wing family. I mean, Jack Kennedy, he was a hawk. He was a militant anti-communist, a hawk on defense for a capital gains tax cut and a balanced budget. It was only after Bobby thought that and Bobby was aspired to be McCarthy's chief counsel. It was only after he felt that he had got his brother murdered, the guilt, that he moved left. And it was only after Teddy Kennedy, one of the first things that Teddy Kennedy did after he killed that woman at Chappaquiddick was to give a speech attacking America's war in Vietnam. That's how the Kennedy family moved left. It was to gain moral stature, actually. Oh, that's a Fred Thompson joke, and it's a good one, which is, that Hollywood is a place where people think that you can gain in moral stature by getting next to people in Washington.
I have two questions. One's a quick fact question, and the other one is a thought question. The quick fact question is, where are the back issues of Heterodoxy available? Are they on the internet?
They should be on the internet, and if they're not,
At what site?
it should be up on our site. You know, we have a complex of sites, but front page should be the door, or I had them put Heterodoxy up there, so that I know there are a lot of issues. And if they're not, call my office and tell them that I
Okay,
said
great.
this,
Great, I'll do that.
and we'll get to work on it.
Thank you. Then the longer question is, as you were talking about, the issue is not the issue, and you were talking about ACORN, it made me wonder, is not the same thing going on with Planned Parenthood funding from the federal government? The issue there really isn't the issue of family planning, it's really the issue of government control. Or do you not, or do you agree with that?
It could be. I mean, I know that when my mother left, she resigned from as a teacher because they were going to investigate her because she was a communist. She immediately got a job with Planned Parenthood because it was run by the communists, and still is. So funding Planned Parenthood is basically, again, funding the left. Look, it's all patronage. It's just like Tammany Hall. I mean, this is just patronage system. And that's why, you know, I've watched Republican politicians. I mean, Schwarzenegger did this in California, but they'll take on the unions. And they'll, you know, it'll be like card check or it'll, whatever. And for Republicans, it's an issue. But for them, it's life and death. This is where they live. So if you're going to go after them, you better have a big war chest, and you better make it one issue and not. He had 4 propositions, which is why he went down. But yeah, these are the armies of the left, and they are. What's the stimulus money? Where did the trillions of dollars go? It went to state budgets so that all these bureaucrats in the state systems, who are all going to be Democrats and leftists, don't lose their jobs. Everybody else is cutting their budget, except for the states and the cities. And that's where all the lion's share of the Obama money has gone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horowitz. We have time for one more question
Okay.
right here. Thank you, Mr. Horowitz, for your talk. And actually, I'm a graduate of Hillsdale College, so I wasn't a product of the public education system that you're referring to. But I have a kind of a temperament question about the conservative temperament. You talked about how conservatives like to use reason and appear moderate, and because we tend to be reasonable, as opposed to demonizing our opponents. So how do we debate without looking like we are radicals? How do we debate without co-opting their methods?
I mean, that's the $64,000 question that you have to answer. I often say that I think that I've been sent as an ex-radical to teach conservatives bad manners. But you know, look, being, you know, having a conservative outlook, I know that conservatives are not going to be radicals, and that's good. But, you know, maybe 10% shift. You've got to find a way to do it. I have to say, I think Sarah Palin is very good at this. You know, how are you liking the Opie changey thing? I mean, that's so you find a way, but just don't mistake who your opponent is, and don't be intimidated by them. A lot of conservatives will back off. You're going to have to get a little bloodied, and I think that that's happening. I think the Tea Party movement is a good example. I saw it happening in my academic campaign. There was a film called Obsession, which was about the Islamofascists and their jihad against America in the West. And a student wanted to show it at Pace College, and the president's, the Muslim Students Association, which is an arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, complained, and the president shut it down, which violated their constitutional rights, and they eventually were allowed to show it. But I had an event here in Washington with 500 students, and at the event, this was in February 3 years ago, I said, on April, I am declaring right now, April 19th, Islamofascism Awareness Day, and I will show this film on 100 campuses. And the minute I said it, I said, what did I just, I don't know, maybe so, I can't think of an occasion where two conservative organizations worked in concert on different campuses. No, I've spoken at Amherst College. There are 5 colleges within 10 miles of each other near Amherst. Near Amherst College, UMass, Amherst, Smith, and the others. And they didn't coordinate. I mean, it's not like a conservative speaker comes in every week to these schools. So no coordination. And that's conservatives, if they see somebody walking alongside them, they say, oh, God, I'm a collectivist. I'm but I got 100 universities to do it. And I did Islamofascism Awareness Weeks 3 or 4 times, and we were able to coordinate 100 campuses. And that's a change. And also, calling it Islamofascism Awareness Day, you can imagine. I mean, a conservative is brought up to understand that their reputation is as important an asset as they have, not to get into fights with skunks and so forth. That's everybody is schooled that way. And you just go out for Islamofascism Awareness Week, you're going to be attacked as racist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe, etc. But the kids did it. And I think that, it's a changed mentality because of the war. We're at war. We've been attacked, and we're going to be, we were attacked just since Obama. I mean, there's been if any of those other attacks were successful, they could have, a plane exploding over Detroit or blowing up Times Square. We're in a war, and you have to change your mentality somewhat for the war. There's a lot of conservatives in the military, and they know how to fight. So. I just wanted to say that I've actually had a long kind of relationship with Hillsdale, even though I've never been to the campus. That back, I can't remember what it was, 2000. I worked with Larry Arnn, who was the Hillsdale president, on Ward Connolly's Civil Rights Initiative campaign. We worked together on that, and I've done a Hillsdale fundraiser, so I'm very supportive of this institution, and I hope all you will be too.